Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The first item of business for this meeting is the election of a chair for the rest of the municipal year. Are there any nominations, please?
Can I nominate Councillor Zoe McGee, please?
And are there any other nominations? And is the nomination of Councillor McGee seconded? That's by Councillor Best. And is the nomination of Councillor Lawman seconded, please? Councillor Max. Okay, for Councillor Zoe McGee, can I have a show of all those in favour, please? And against? And for Councillor Lawman, those in favour? That's 4 votes for Councillor Lawman, 3 votes for Councillor McGee, so Councillor Lawman is appointed chairman.
Okay. Thank you. It was Everdas, wasn't it? So the next item we have is election of vice chairman. Have we got a nomination from the floor? We haven't got one yet, no. I think he's declining. I think you can self-nominate if you want. No.
Can I nominate Charlie, Councillor Best?
Okay, you got a seconder for that?
Yeah, me.
Okay. Can we self-nominate? I suppose we can.
Can do as long as he seconded.
Yes. So has anyone, Councillor Maxwell has nominated herself. Has anyone going to second that? Councillor Jackson. So we have the same situation. Those in favour of Councillor Maxwell? Oh, we've got one. Are you voting? Are you voting, Councillor Brown? Okay. And for Councillor Best? Yes, yes. Okay. So Councillor Best is appointed 4-2. Apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Carr. I don't think there are any others.
That's the only one.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. I'll start on that. It is on the website, but I'm a public governor at Ketting General. There's no conflict because the governors have no position other than to appoint non-executive directors. No other formal policy role. Anybody else? No? Okay. So next we've got the minutes of the 11th of July meeting. I wasn't present. I have watched it online, but I wasn't present. Somebody present like to propose it? Councillor Brown and then Councillor Scott to Councillor Best to second it. Thank you. We can go through it in a second. Any comments on it? No? All happy to approve it? Are there any matters that people have picked up of substance as opposed to? No? Okay. I've been asked, so that's approved. I've been asked if we can swap items 7 and 6 around. Has anybody got any objections to that? So we're going to take the NHS Foundation Trust Joint Working Community Bed Approach, which is on page 79 first, and I think there's a presentation, isn't there? If you'd like to introduce yourselves and...
Thanks very much, and firstly thanks to colleagues for allowing us to adjust the agenda, just a few of us kind of doing on call and so on. So I'm David Mayer, I'm the Managing Director for Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust and the Deputy Chief Exec. and I'm here with colleagues. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. This is a joint piece of work across the partnership, and we're here to just give you an update on some of the great progress we've made so far, and just give you an indication of our intended direction of travel, and get your feedback on that. So if I go this way through Anne and then on to...
Hi, my name's Anne Rackham. I'm interim coup at NHFT, and for this meeting today, I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for this piece of work under the Urgent Care Board under the ICB.
Evening, everybody. My name is Eileen Doyle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Integrated Care Board for Northamptonshire, and I'm working with colleagues and also David and other colleagues at the local authority around this piece of work and urgent and emergency care more broadly.
Evening all, I'm Giles West. I'm Associate Director for Urgent and Emergency Care for Northamptonshire Integrated Care Board.
So if I make a start, so for a number of years, many of us in the room and also colleagues not here this evening have been looking at provision of bedded and non-bedded care for patients and our population across Northamptonshire. And it's a perennial problem. We often talk, and you will hear in the press, about winter pressures and so forth, but I can't remember the last time there was just winter. It's all year round now. One of the things, and I come from a provider background, so I come from acute hospitals, is that very often you will find in community bedded provision that there are spaces and places for patients to go to, but they're in the wrong location or the wrong bed or the wrong type of bed. And so some of the work that's been going on in Northamptonshire, and for a little while actually across the whole piece, is looking at how we provide step up and step down care. And a lot of this work has been led by my colleagues at NHFT, particularly looking about how we move patients out of an acute setting, because there is lots of evidence that says the longer you are in an acute bed, so in Kettering General or in Northampton General as an example, the more likely you are to deteriorate further if you don't actually then move on at the time when you need it. So for many years now we've been trying to solve this problem, and we had a really good push at it last year to work out whether we could have something around Pathway 2 beds. So Pathway 2 are for patients who don't necessarily need long-term care but need something in the interim. And it was really moving away from the traditional model of the community setting in terms of the tightness of criteria around those beds. So everything's still based in the community, but it's a broader offer than you can go into that type of rehab bed or that type of rehab bed, and they all might be in the wrong location. So it's trying to look at a way as a system, both health and social care, how do we move patients into the right care settings so that they maintain their independence, they recover more quickly, and ultimately everybody's aim is that people can go home. And so it's been quite a journey so far, and I think we're starting to move further into what really is the art of the possible in this county. And my colleagues here are going to go through some of that detail. And what we're trying to share tonight is the direction of travel for which we are going, and hope that we are able to have that discussion with you and your support to further continue with that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. And it's worth sort of reiterating that everything that we do in Northamptonshire is co-produced and designed by listening to those that are using services and those that are accessing, to help us make sure that we design and develop solutions that actually work for people and around their holistic needs, rather than just the presenting need on that day for a particular health intervention or social care intervention. And that's been at the core of everything we've been doing. So as Eileen and David said before, this is a journey that's been in existence for a number of years. Shaping that, it was slightly slowed down through the pandemic and through COVID, and then really sort of kick-started with earnest through 2021-22. The pack that you have has a visual representation of how our beds are currently configured across the health and social care provision in Northamptonshire. And again, that's built over many years, a very deliberate attempt to ensure that we've got bedded solutions within 5 to 10 miles of people's own homes. Now, there will always be elements of that are specialist. So in order, for example, for stroke rehabilitation, we've historically had stroke beds in different settings across the county, and we found that would produce poorer outcomes for people. Consolidating stroke beds into the single site that they currently are at Isbrook Hospital in Wellingborough means that you've got the wraparound specialist therapies, the right environment to enable people to return home in a much quicker timeline. And that's also something we found with our emerging dementia and delirium beds, where there are complex dementia and delirium presentations. They're better managed with a small group of people, 10 to 12 people in one setting, but making sure that where the dementia and the delirium can be managed closer to home, every unit we have is able to provide that care in that local environment. And so we're fortunate in Northamptonshire that from historic investment decisions from the council that set up the original specialist care centre contract many years ago, we've got some very good estate. Equally, we've inherited some very poor estate that's been around since the start of the NHS in 48, and particularly some of those around Corby Hospital, which has, and colleagues no doubt will be here aware that Corby and Icebrook over many years have had different projects designed to redevelop them, and yet at the same time we have sat at different occasions with beds empty in some of our specialist care centres. And when we analysed that, and we were looking at what were the causes of those, and as Eileen said, the wrong patient not being identified because we didn't have the skill set wrapped around. So we had a bed available, but it was deemed to be a healthcare need and not a social care need. And so the big piece of transition work that started through integrated care last year was really to say, well, what if we put those staff together? What if we deliver using the best estate? And we started that with the Turn Furlong Specialist Care Centre in Northampton. By bringing health and social care in, we found that we significantly reduced the length of stay from 65 to 70 days down to 40 days. We were getting more people home, fewer people back into hospital, and we maximised the occupancy of the building. So where we were running at 60 to 70%, we were back up to 100%. Ensuring we're using the best of our resources is critical. Since that point, North Council has taken on Thackley Green and the ownership of Thackley and implemented a very similar model with the same principles and concepts behind it of what do the persons need, and then how do we wrap the staff and the solutions in order to achieve those outcomes. So all of that is described in the slide, but also anchored into there as a visual representation of Mavis, who's our theoretical person in the middle. And this is really important for our whole transformation programme, that there's no point in fixing one part of our system if we're not also in parallel looking at all the other elements that people need. And within that, that's about developing services closer to home, particularly around our group programmes and our remote monitoring and all the other tools that people need. So all of that, the building on Turf Furlong has been successful. There's, as Eileen said, a lot of work happening within the acute hospital to identify the person at the right time, not waiting until they're medically fit and then thinking about where do they need to go, but from the day somebody's being admitted, understanding, are they going to go straight home? Do we need a bedded solution in the meantime? And are we planning for that from the start?
So, thank you. Moving on to how we're seeing things as we carry on through 2023 and into 24. Obviously, Turn Furlong continues as a project, but what's really exciting is as Thackley Green grows and develops its model as an integrated model, we're really seeing improvements already for the north of the county. So the Kettering General Hospital have been able to reduce some of their surge capacity, which means that people who have health and social care needs are getting both of them met in a community, more homely setting, which has better outcomes for them. What's been really exciting with the work we've done is that the vision is to have integrated care, but both sites have taken a very sort of place view of what is needed for that community. So Thackley Green is developing what the residents within this unitary need, rather than just copying models from anywhere, either locally or in the country. And that's really quite exciting for people to see something that they recognise as from their locality. We've also had really good feedback. That's been from the people who we've spoken to within the settings, but people are nationally taking quite an interest in what's happening in Northamptonshire, because we've really taken integration forward to the next stage. So that leaves us really to drive forward some of those models, but also think about how does this focus on winter, and how do we really cope with some of the other specialties that Giles was talking about, particularly around stroke. How do we develop that further? But one of the areas that we really want to focus on this winter is around dementia and delirium, where we know that those patients would be better in a community setting that's very bespoke and specialist for them. So that's what the centres are focusing on at the moment. So we'll continue to engage with our stakeholders because that's really important for us, that we are making something that's bespoke for each specific area. We want to utilise the best of our combined estate and think about what's in a place and what's the best for that area. I've mentioned about developing the clinical models. We want to try and reduce the time that people stay in hospital. We know that that has a huge impact on people's lives and also their families, and that's been a real issue where we have not had beds in the right place and people have had to travel long distance, maybe right across the county, to visit a loved one in a community hospital. And we just want to use the learning that we've got from Turn Furlong and Thackley Green to make the best that we can for our population. So the reason for bringing this here today is to update people on where we're at, but also to start to have the discussions, and we've just put some area of discussion at the bottom of the slides of things that we really want to sort of surface, really, about how do we make the best use of the joint estate by delivering services together. We want to develop our community beds to get those right bed in the right place. And how do we develop the conversations moving forward? Because this has been a programme that's not only been going on for some time, but will have a life going forward into the next years. So how do we get that conversation with you here in the north? And that's about it. Anything to add, guys? No? Thank you.
Sorry. Is that... I've got a full rank, and I've got a few questions first, which might cover. So the first thing, you mentioned Icebrook a couple of times, but it's not in the papers at all, and not in the little map either. So I just wondered if there were any plans for Icebrook, and if there are, what they might be. Secondly, you have got Spinneyfields on the plan, and that's of course closed. Funny enough, I was asked a question today in the Council of Governors meeting at the hospital whether what was happening and what the timescale was, and so I said, they'll have to ask. Turn Furlong, I used to be the councillor there, so it's changed. Are we completely out of shore with that now? Is that PFI gone completely? Because that was, with regard to the Mavis, I remember my father had got all the assistance stuff, and frankly didn't use it, didn't know how to use it, and was partly frightened of it. So how clear are we? What I don't want to see is we go headlong into automating and digitalising everything for people who are not able to or willing to use it. And the last thing, and it may be too early yet, has this programme seen a reduction in falls? Because that was one of the main things that was happening. People were going back into hospital because of falls. So those are my bits, and I've got afterwards. Go on.
If you don't mind me, might monopolise some of this. I'll try to share it across. Brilliant. So just to clarify, first of all, and apologies because it isn't clear on the listing, but when you look at the map pictorial, the two units that are on Icebrook are listed. They're Hazelwood Ward and Beechwood Ward. So they're shown, but we should have put them as being Icebrook, so there was a clarity on there. But they're sort of linked across to the Wellingborough one, but they're the two units on the Icebrook Hospital site. So at the minute, we've got 47 beds there at Icebrook. And that's part of the conversation that colleagues were saying around how do we make the best use of estate. We know that we have a lease, for example, at Beechwood that expires, and we've got Spinneyfields sitting empty. So the part of the thinking and the planning is how can we right-size that, how can we put some of that specialist capacity into Spinneyfields, making better use of that allows us to come out of the lease that we need to leave in Icebrook. So that's part of the development work that's ongoing. The Shaw contract, I'll perhaps ask David to pick up if that was okay for those elements. On the falls, I'm just going to jump to the falls and the tech. The falls is a fantastic piece of progress that we're making across. It's in the Better Care Fund as one of the new metrics this year for falls reduction. Through the targeted strength and balance classes that we've put into place, we've seen a massive reduction in hospital admissions across our older population. So when we compare 2019 to 2022, 10% population rise in our older people, but we've got 5% fewer people going to hospital than 3 years ago, which is the only place in the country who's seen that kind of movement. There's a lot of work that we've been doing, and this ties into the technology. So we've deployed razor chairs into 14 of the care homes now, and into the reablement teams north and west, and into community responders within the paramedics. And they are utilising an app that was developed by the West of England Ambulance Service that guides people through safe lifting. So the razor chairs enable you to lift somebody from the floor single-handed. So normally what would happen before is the patient would end up with a long wait. It'd be a low priority for EMAS. By the time they've laid on the floor for 7 or 8 hours, dehydrated, pressurised, they're more likely to go to hospital. Here we can now do a 2-hour community response using the razor chairs, and we've got 81 falls that we've responded to in the last 3 months, of which 20 needed to go to hospital for x-ray, etc., but the others have all been dealt with and avoided those people going to hospital. So there's loads that we could bring back to this meeting around falls. That is a huge success. And the technology is a key part of that. We've got remote monitoring set up now for 9 of the care homes across the county, and we're currently at 256 patients in their own home being monitored. And exactly as you said, it's about picking the right people with complex long-term conditions, but then spending time with them, helping them get used to the equipment. And what we've found is some fantastic outcomes on that a lot of people are saying, oh, mum and dad won't cope with the technology, etc. But actually, we've got people now who have been able to take carers breaks because they're using the tech in a different way. And actually, some of our older population absolutely love it, because what it gives them through the tech is that independence back, but knowing that at the press of a button they can talk to a Band 7 nurse if there's any concerns. And anxiety and depression is a massive impact on people's lifestyle. Just knowing that there's a nurse at the end of the button, rather than just a response from a call handler, makes a fantastic difference. And so there's a key thing for us about expanding that technology. Sorry.
Okay, David, you wanted to?
Yeah, if you wanted me to just pick up the Shore Healthcare contract element. So just prior to vesting day, the care elements of the 3 remaining specialist care centres, so Turn Furlong, Thackley Green and Spinneyfields, were de-scoped from the Shore contract. So effectively that care element was bought out of the Shore contract. The PFI around the buildings and the FM, so the facilities management parts of the buildings, still sits with Shore. And that's managed through contract management in that sense. It would be too costly for the local authorities to buy out that element of the PFI. With Shore, there's about 6 years remaining on those. At that point, then the FM responsibilities will revert back to West Northants for Turn Furlong and Longlands. We tend not to mention Longlands because it's being used as a long-term care provision at the moment, whereas the 3 Spinneyfields, Turn Furlong and Thackley Green have that potential to be used for these functions, whereas Longlands doesn't. But the FM responsibilities for Spinneyfields and Thackley Green will revert to North Northamptonshire at that point where the PFI concludes.
Okay.
So not fully divested from it, but the care elements are, which gives us then the ability, which we'd struggled with before. We couldn't get Shore to take on different varying needs or different groups of people within that cohort. So we found that occupancy was very, very low, and for the amount of money that was being put into those contracts, it didn't make sense, hence doing that.
Oh, I lived through that at NCC. Councillor McGee, you had a question? All right, Councillor Lee then. Yeah, pass the buck.
Right. Interesting report. You use some shorthand in places. For example, health search unstaffed in a hospital unstaffed. Can you explain that? And recovery independence bed units. Can you explain what that means? But mainly palliative care. There are only 6 beds, and that's something that you step down to, but you do not step up from. Shouldn't we need more beds? Aren't we relying too much on the voluntary sector? I've had a begging letter from Cransley Hospice today in Kettering, which is doing a fantastic job, but they run entirely on voluntary donations. I think we need, with an aging population, we need more palliative care beds. So only seeing 6 here. Why so few? Thank you.
So if I start, so in terms of unstaffed surge, there will be very often areas at Kettering General, which might be the day surgery unit, which is not staffed overnight because of the nature of the unit. But if there is more demand for people coming in than going home, then very often, and we see it a lot over winter across the country, but here is no different, that then those beds are turned over to having inpatient medical beds very often. So undoubtedly, from a financial perspective, there will be some allowance for that in the budgets, but actually everybody tries to avoid it. And so therefore, if you've got unstaffed surge, very often what it will mean is you're using more bank and agency staff, you're then having to transfer a member of your own team off of one of their home wards to look after that area. So it's never ideal to have unstaffed surge open for any length of time other than in extremis. There will always maybe be 1 or 2 weeks of the year, but when you're relying on that, it really disrupts all sorts of other care. Okay. Do you want to?
Just in relation to the hospices, that's the provision we have in the community beds. As you mentioned, we've got Cransley, we've also got Cynthia Spencer. At the moment, there's an end of last years of life process review going on to look at what we have, working with the 2 hospices as well as the ICB and the providers to think about how do we have the whole end-of-life pathway reviewed, and how do we use the resources to the best and support the agencies who are managing that. So that's a process that's going on at the moment, which is why we wouldn't have changed it in here, because that process has got to go through.
It's a separate
issue.
Yeah.
And also the most important thing is that we give our population a choice as to where they want to die.
Yeah.
So lots of people, my own family members would prefer to go to a hospice, but we send lots of people home with wraparound care for their last weeks or months of life.
Mayor, Councillor, also just there is a blended funded model for hospices, so the ICB do provide some resource, and there is charitable funding and endowments. Just to make it clear, it's not all charitable. There is a statutory element as well.
Sorry, just to come back on the two other questions. One linked to palliative. The RIBU is the Recovering Independence Unit. It was trying to find a new name that wasn't health and wasn't social care, and it was about recovering independence. It was both of the organisations working together. So that's the title of why RIBU is there as a descriptor for it, for that. And the other thing, just to go back onto the palliative, the reason it shows those at Daventry, one of the things that's been in existence for several years, many years in fact, in Northamptonshire, is that Daventry was always operated and supported by local GPs who developed that specialist skill set of being able to manage end of life appropriately in those community settings. Where we move into the new model, as we're starting to do, we're taking primary care with us so that GPs are running and looking after the community facilities, and as they skill up and strengthen, and part of that would be ensuring that appropriate care for end of life can be delivered in all of our units, because you've got the GPs and the hospice at home service wrapped around it. So,
can I ask when this piece of work around palliative care will be completed? When can we expect to see the outcome of that?
So the Director of Nursing at the Chief Nurse at the ICB is leading the last years of life, so it's all ages, and my understanding is that there will be some outputs this side of Christmas, and obviously it will be an iterative process, because I think we'd all accept there's a lot of work to do there, but it's really about understanding what we have, what we haven't got, and how we best craft that offer for everybody that needs it.
Councillor Maxwell. Microphone, you need to.
Why is it still empty? That's what I want to know.
Yes, David.
Okay, so it's empty because it's a unit run by a different authority at the moment. You may recall, Councillor Maxwell, that we took a proposal to the executive in December to take on the running of one specialist care centre. And the primary reason for us only taking the recommendation for the local authority to take on one specialist care centre is because we only have the demand for around about 35 social care beds for the purposes of rehabilitating people with social care needs. So there was never a need for us to have 102 beds. and it would not be value for money and would not be considered best. I would not be meeting our best value duty if I had recommended at that point that we take on the running of both. The positive things that we are talking about is how can we use that estate and how can we bring back its use as quickly as possible for the benefits of Northamptonshire residents, and possibly in the space of a smaller amount of those beds for the whole of the county, because we may find there's some specialist services on there. So that's the main reason that it's been mothballed, is the plans and the clinical models that are required to support those sorts of developments are not there at the moment. The other thing which Eileen, if I gave her the chance to speak on it, she would say is we have to consult before we make changes to any of the existing provisions that we've got as well. So absolutely, Spinneyfields is within our minds as being a resource that we believe is fit for purpose for the future, but we're not quite at that point where we were able to say we'll step in and take over the running as a system of Spinneyfields at the time where we were notified that West Northants felt that they were no longer able to run it. So we very much feel that there is a future for Spinneyfields. We need to work on that clinical model, consult on it with people that use health and care services across the whole of Northamptonshire, not just Northamptonshire, before we can move forward with any proposals affecting any of these sites where it says the current P2 bed position, so the map slide, if that makes sense.
I think personally, I think when you look at Spinneyfields sitting there empty, nothing's happening, and then you've got this criticism of the fact that we're leaving people in hospitals for much longer than they should be out, having some sort of care. You know, it just seems to me, how can you really justify this? You could seriously put in people temporarily and then move them around, rather than just have a building sitting there where it's purpose-built, etc., etc., just not doing nothing.
Just in response to that, so I suppose the main challenge that we have is we can't just put people in there without the right clinical models around them, the right doctor support, the right nursing elements in there, the right therapy support. And you can't just go to a local GP surgery and say, we want you to provide an enhanced model of primary care support, because we know that our GP surgeries are already stretched in that sense. So you have to commission the services that you wrap around there. We can't go out to commission until we've designed what the clinical model will be and then consulted on it. So I get your frustration. Actually, we all feel exactly the same frustration, but there are steps which you have to go through before we can mobilise those sorts of models.
But the way I see it is, it seems to be no joined up thinking. 1 minute. So, for instance, where this is situated, Spinneyfield, the surgeries there are not fully equipped anyway with the doctors. There's not enough doctors in Russian as it stands at the moment. And I think, but going back to the hospitals, you keep on getting this time and time and time again that we are not actually doing enough to make sure that the people aren't staying in hospital for longer than they have to, that they should be out there, you know, not being penned into these places. And equally, going back to care in the community, I personally think that we've got to do more care to help people who want to go back to their homes, so that we can help them live in their own homes rather than popping them into one of these nursing homes.
Councillor,
Thank you.
Chair,
I
mean, Councillor Maxwell, really good point. I mean, in many ways, they illustrate the fact that we're here this evening having this conversation because we want to get to the direction that you're describing, and this is part of that conversation. So just to reassure you, it's not something that's existing over there or not in our plan. It is part of the plan and is why we're here. On the recovery independence bed, I mean, Councillor Lee asked for the definition, which Giles explained. It is about recovery and independence. So the whole model that we are trying to develop as a partnership is exactly the one you've described, which is not putting people into bedded solutions, but getting them home where they can recover and be independent, and doing that in a quick way, as Giles said, so that they don't deteriorate in beds if they do need a bed for a short period of time. So in many ways, you've more eloquently described what this item this evening is about than perhaps we did. So thank you.
Yeah, I can assure you that the hospital is very keen to be able to discharge people as soon as possible. And I think they would also say that every doctor that was at Spinneyfields is a doctor that wasn't at Kettering General doing something there. So that's always something for them to think. And I assume that in the case of Spinneyfields, if there's any substantial physical changes, it has to go through Shaw and the PFI and all their funders, and that's a long-term process. Yeah. Sorry, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so just in response to, this is very, when we're talking about community beds, we are very much talking about Pathway 2 and some of Pathway 3. So our palliative beds tend to fall into what we call Pathway 3. There's actually another 2 pathways, believe it or not. There's not a Pathway 4, but there's a Pathway 0 and a Pathway 1. Pathway 0 tends to be people who don't need care support coming out of hospital, so there's more simple discharges from hospital. There's still a requirement for particularly the acute hospitals to think about how they manage those discharges, because that tends to be quite a large number of people, and how you work with the GP surgeries, community nursing, etc., to get people out quickly is really important. But Pathway 1 is the bit which you're referring to, and we have a huge... So Anne and David have an intermediate care team. I have a reablement team, both which focus on supporting people to get directly home, either from the acute hospitals or out of either the Ribbu or Thackley Green or any of the community hospitals that we've got. So that there is that route for people to get directly home. But I absolutely agree with you, and particularly in dementia cases, it can usually be better if you get people back to their own homes, an environment that they're familiar with, rather than sending them to another environment which is unfamiliar to them. On the changes to the physical buildings, absolutely, it'd be dead costly as well. So what we're trying to do is work within the limitations or the minor changes that we can make to those buildings. But actually they are very fit for purpose. One of the things which we are exploring within Thackley Green is whether we can use possibly 2 of the apartments as bariatric reablement apartments. So bariatrics meaning for people who are morbidly obese. It tends to be something which is a gap within provision, and we'd like to consider how we potentially use some of those beds. So, and it may be that that's enough for the whole of the county, and we just use it in that sense, and it may be that there's something slightly different at the others. But we are being really, I mean, it was one of the points which I wanted to make later on. But that place-based approach, we recognise that that's probably something that we can do. And it may be beneficial to the whole of the county, but it might not be appropriate for it to happen at both Turn Furlong and Thackley Green or Spinneyfields. So it's about what's the right model, and where do you see some of that demand within the county? Do we see a higher prevalence of obesity in certain parts of the county, which is where we might decide to locate some of those sorts of services?
Thank you. Councillor McGee, you had a question. Is the same topic? Okay. Go on.
Just about keeping people with dementia out of homes, we are relying too much on the family at the moment, and the family is not getting enough support. I know a dementia patient in his 80s, and his wife is also in her 80s, and she needs to pay £38 an hour for a carer to come and give her a break. And she's absolutely exhausted. She's desperate for a break. We are relying on relatives as carers, and I wonder if we could do more to support those relatives, without whom those people would not, with progressed dementia, would not be able to stay out of the home.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yes, so one thing that is happening at the moment is the county-wide carer strategy is being refreshed. However, we've also said, again, on that place-based approach, that we don't want to just assume that the same approaches for carers will be the same in West Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire, so there may be a bit of a place-based nuance to those. clearly, I don't know the individual case which you're talking about. It may be a case where the individuals themselves are not entitled to financial assistance from the local authority, or so in that sense we may not be able to provide that care and support. But we do regularly provide respite to people in their own homes, or at times, if it makes sense and it's suitable and there's an established relationship, for people to have respite outside of their home environments as well. But certainly those pieces of work are going on around refreshing our approach to understanding how we support carers, and is there more that we can do in that space.
Councillor Brown. We'll do it.
Thanks very much for the report. It's really interesting and concise, really clear for me to understand. I can absolutely see a lot of the benefits to this kind of programme. I think what's missing from the report for me is what are the risks, both to the patient and to the implementer of this programme. What are the risks to you guys?
I mean, I think probably the fairest way to answer that, Councillor Brown, is probably as we keep the conversation open with you as we go along on this journey, we bring back some of those as they emerge. Not all of them will be apparent because we haven't gone deep into some of this detail. We've learned from some of the risks for what we've done in the West, which will obviously inform our work. But we'll, as part of our ongoing dialogue, if that fits with you, we'll keep you updated on that.
Yeah, I mean, particularly for patient risks, we know that there's quite a lot of risk for this population staying in hospital. So it's how we balance that out and work through. And I think that's some of the stuff we'll bring back of how do we minimise the risks with the sort of technology, teams, training that we've got within the community to be able to enable that pathway through. But I think it's something that will come, as Dave says, come back through in the work we bring back to you to each individual environment you can see that for.
Just in addition to that as well, so my health colleagues always panic when I mention money and things like that, but both local government and the NHS are financially stretched at the moment. NHS tend to have limited access to things like capital funding, usually have to compete with every health system in the country around different proposals. And I think part of the language used earlier on was our health estate has become quite dilapidated. And I'm really keen that doesn't happen moving forward. So I think if we are going to be a mature system, we have to think about how we develop things like sinking funds for the remaining estate that we do keep, so they don't become dilapidated and that they remain really good environments for us to provide both clinical and care support to people moving forward. So I think that's something which we need to think about. I think there is a wider question perhaps to central government around how they treat things like capital receipts. So if there is any of those estates which are owned by the NHS, rather than that money going back to central government or to Treasury or to NHS or to the NHS centrally, how can we use that to reinvest in services locally so that our residents benefit from it? Or how can we make the sites available for other things? So we know that some of our GP estate's not really up to standard anymore. So as part of perhaps moving services from one area, you can use some of that to redevelop on those sites. So I think money is a big risk to achieving some of this, mainly because there's quite a risk about moving services around. You know what it's like, Councillor Brown, if you're having to change a work base of quite a large number of staff, then we have to go through consultations with them, with their unions as well. So all the practicalities of doing that add risk around the time delivery and the likelihood of achieving that earlier rather than later. But I agree with that, the comment which Anne made, which is the right place for people is not in an acute hospital usually. So, the risk of picking up infection, that sense of being a patient rather than being someone who's on the road to recovery, because you perhaps haven't got the right sort of attention in there. We can set these environments up how we want with the right support in them. Some of the bits which we're doing around I mean, bearing in mind we've only had Thackley Green about 10 weeks so far, we're looking at basing our reablement team in there so that we can do a pull model so that our community-based reablement staff will go and physically look at every person that we have within Thackley Green and say, even when our therapists are maybe saying we don't think they're ready, our staff who know what it's like to work in those environments will say, we think they are ready and we think we can support them in there. So we'd like to take them out earlier and get them back home and rehabilitate them more in there. So those are some of the models that we're exploring. Our therapists at Thackley Green are also exploring a 24-hour reablement model. So looking at, for example, our domestic staff, not just going in and cleaning bedrooms, but working with people to see, well, actually, can they do some of the cleaning themselves? You know, these are the sorts of things which they might have been doing back home prior to having a medical incident or an accident of some sort. So really looking at every aspect of someone's life and thinking about how we can do things differently.
Councillor McGee, you're on.
Thank you. Actually, David pretty much answered my question, which is just as well, otherwise I probably would have forgotten. So I just want to congratulate you and express my gratitude for your support, and really my concern was just about the fact that, yeah, this must cost a lot of money to do, and this kind of new wave of technology and this new way of doing things doesn't come cheap. So yeah, my question was around the financial sustainability of that, and then the caution that we all have of bringing all these new great ideas, getting people's hopes up, doing a really good job, and then watching them crumble is a genuine concern. So yeah, thank you for answering that, David. Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Maxwell, you've got it.
Well, I have two questions. How many people do we actually have in Kettering General at the moment?
I think it's about a 600-bedded unit.
That's for general admissions rather than elective planned surgery.
Right.
So it's 500, 569 at Northampton.
And the other question I've got to ask, where you get some people, because I'm actually dealing with a couple at the moment, where you get some people wishing to change accommodation, the bungalow where they live at the moment, do you not think that we should be building a lot more bungalows to help people with disabilities and...
I don't think planning policy is within the gift
No,
of the
but what I'm
integrated
saying is basically I'm dealing with a couple who live in the bungalow, they lived there some years, but the bathroom is just too small. You can get one person in there, not two. So if he has to have a shower, whatever it is, the carer who comes along can't get in there at the same time. So what I'm saying is, if we actually now make sure that when we get developments now in future, that we actually say to these developers, right, you've got to build X amount of bungalows, then that would actually
They will
help.
come back and tell you that they build a number. There's a different phrase which I've forgotten, which allows the properties to be adapted. And there's also disabled facilities grants for the internals.
Yeah, I know, but the disabled, which was used in this bungalow, by the way, is not fit for purpose now because, you know, it's outlived what it was actually originally for, which was a wet room, but it's still too small. You can't go to toilet, for instance, because you can't shut the door. What did the officer say? Well, you take the door off, you see, so that they can sit there and go to toilet without the door. Well, I mean, you know, I think at the end of the day, we've got to think these are people and they do need recognising that they should have quality of life.
I think you need to take this up with Mr Harbour and Councillor Brackenbury, who have more input on that side of things. Though I'm sure as a statutory consultee there might be some responses. Did you want to go?
Just to add into that, so certainly we are assessing the needs of our population moving forward and recognising that there are certainly going to need to be more specialist accommodation, and certainly around Northamptonshire, we haven't seen as much extra care development as we would want to see. So we would like, when we are looking at master plans for particular areas, we would want to be specifying how some of those needs are met. So possibly not as bungalows, but certainly as accommodation that would be suitable for people that have additional needs so that they can have their care provision within there. Even if someone's had an adaptation in the past, if they've outlived that adaptation, that doesn't mean that they're not entitled to another disabled facilities grant. And there are possibilities that that can be done through extending part of the property as well, so creating a bigger space for that wet room in that sense. Probably not for discussion here in House Scrutiny, but we could certainly pick it up outside the meeting.
I think it's an issue because over the last 10 years, to be quite frank, we're actually neglected this aspect of coming out of hospital, being independent, looking after yourself, thinking, oh, well, we can just plonk them here. It's not that simple, but I do think we've got to seriously look in the future how we actually deal with people who want to live independently, not just shuffled around. That's my view.
Okay. I think this is an example of where it's coming. So anybody else got any? Councillor Jackson.
Thank you. This is going back to Spinneyfields. I was led to believe the problem with Spinneyfields, why there were beds left unused, was because the contract did not allow the patients who were transferring from the hospital, then going on to home, they could not be used by patients with any medical conditions. Well, to my mind, if a building is not fit for purpose, you improve it. Therefore, if the contract is not fit for purpose, why on earth was that not changed so that those vacant beds could have been used? Then it releases, obviously, patients from the general hospitals.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for that question, Councillor Jackson. So I think that the challenge that you refer to probably goes back to the original Shaw challenges that we had, which was that they wouldn't provide the level of care support that we needed. So when the PFIs were set up back in the early 2000s, there was a level of care which was prescribed at that time, which would be met within the contract limits. As things have moved on, the people that we would have supported through that environment back in those days, we get back home now. So the people that we would look to going into those environments have a lot more complex needs. So back in 2020, it might have been the end of 2019, we removed the care services from the Shaw contract. So they were provided by Northamptonshire County Council at that time. On vesting day, West Northamptonshire Council took on the responsibility for that. So it is now within our gift to design the clinical models and provide that, because we are no longer reliant on Shaw Healthcare to provide that. As the points which I made earlier on is we can't just put things in there and say that's going to work. We have to have an evidence base. We have to have a business case that's built. We have to generally take the clinical models to our clinicians, usually through something called a clinical senate, where they agree that this is the right amount of clinical support that you need in that environment. Now you can go off and commission it. So that would probably be the layperson's way which I would describe that. Yes, that was a challenge back in the day, 2019, 2020, which led to that coming back. At this moment in time, we haven't got those models developed to a point where we would want them to be. Bear in mind that we had a pandemic thrown in there, so all of our planning, which these guys have been doing around the healthcare estate, just got pushed to one side at that point. So yes, we are playing catch up, and we want to get there quickly, but there has been a huge amount of work, I would say, probably in the last 12 months, around understanding our demand, understanding what's happening with our population as well, because our current demand is not going to be our demand in 5 years or 10 years' time. So what we don't want to do is say, well, this is the estate that we're going to use, and then suddenly find in 5 years' time that it's not big enough now to support our population. So there is an element of medium-term planning that we have to do as well.
Okay, thank you. We all... Okay. Any conclusions, any comments people want? The last page asks you how we should build on today's conversation. Any councillors want to throw a suggestion into the ring before we close? Councillor McGee.
Yeah, it would be great next time to have some clarity around the budgets and the financial risks in the next presentation.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I mean, prevention is better than cure, isn't it? And if we can keep people out of hospital either before they have some illness or when they've been cured, then that's great. And the amount of, and it's nice to see some partnership working going on, and it's really really vital. And it's the whole point of integrated care, that everybody works together, which may not have always been the case in the past. So thank you very much for coming, and maybe we look forward to seeing you with a progress report further in later on. Thank you. Are you staying, are you?
It's still money wasted.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Some more introductions needed. And a substantial piece of work on short breaks. So if you'd like to start, that's fine.
Thank you. Should we introduce ourselves first? Yeah. I'm Louise Di Chiara. I'm Assistant Director for Quality Assurance and Commissioning at North Hampshire Children's Trust.
Hello, I'm Sian Heal. I'm Head of Children and Young People's Transformation at the Integrated Care Board.
I'm Sam Baker, and I'm the North Coordinator for the Northamptonshire Parent Forum Group.
Thanks, and Eileen's also with us again for this item too. So thank you very much for the item. We wanted to come and share with you the work that we've undertaken so far to engage with parents, carers and stakeholders on potential development of a potential new model for short breaks for children with disabilities. So you're probably aware short breaks are a statutory requirement for us to ensure that parents have access to provide respite from caring for their child with disabilities, but really importantly, fun and social leisure activities for children with disabilities to mix with other children and to experience new activities. We know from families that short breaks are a real essential lifeline and really valued. And at the moment we have a range of different services. We have 2 residential units which are provided by North Hampshire Foundation Healthcare Trust, one in Rushden, one in Northampton, but they serve children from across the county. They're supporting children with different types of needs. And then we have a range of what we call the non-residential short breaks, so activities in daytimes, school holidays, weekends, providing fun, leisure activities, experiences for children. At the moment, really because of the way we've commissioned it, and we commission between North Hampshire Children's Trust and the ICB, the way we've kind of commissioned services separately as standalone services. And we hear from parents that there could be better coordination, better flexibility across the services to better meet children's needs, better preparation for adulthood, and we're aware that the vast majority of the resources in the residential short breaks element and some of the non-residential short breaks is not accessible for all our children with the higher needs. So, for example, they're not staffed adequately to be able to support children that need that one-to-one support, and so sometimes parents are having to take their children there, which defeats the objects of it. There's also a financial challenge in that the residential short break side of things is not particularly financially sustainable, and so what we are wanting to do and what we've been working and seeking views on. We started back in September 21 to look at how we could remodel the services so that we had better joining together, better flexibility that could better meet children's needs, and to be able to access more activities at times and in places where parents wanted them. So we undertook some work with Council for Disabled Children back in 21 with some workshops developing ideas, seeking views from parents and practitioners. We then moved into a design phase between partner agencies and supported by our Children with Disabilities Board, which has parent representatives on it. In April and May, we undertook some further public consultation, which involved a survey and focus groups. We had 233 people responding in total, and 43% of those were parents and carers who currently use the service. And the majority of those were supportive of bringing services together, having a more flexible staff team, having one referral and joined up process. And they told us the times that they would prefer to be able to access the short breaks. We're about to go into a further phase of consultation, which is why we're here today, because we'd like to hear your views as well. Colleagues will share what we're planning to do in that, but really to seek views on a proposed model, wanting to hear people's thoughts and ideas around that. We are on quite a tight timeline, planning to go out to tender in November in order to award contract for a new service in January for delivery to start in April. And just to highlight, this is part of the overall local offer for children with disabilities, so it's a particular service within that overall local offer for children with disabilities. And finally, before I pass over to Sian, who's just going to share a bit about the proposed model, I just wanted to apologise because there is a typo in the needs section where it refers to West Northants rather than North Northants, so apologies for that. The data is correct, however, for North. Apologies.
Great, thank you, Louise. So I just wanted to kind of share with you some of the proposed changes within a model, and these are proposals, so they're very much out there to kind of for people to consider and to share their views. So one of the first things we wanted to do by reducing the amount of contracts and fragmentation across the services, we wanted to bring the whole of the residential and non-residential short break into one offer and provide that and have it delivered under one lead provider. And that, by doing that, we would then be able to have a better use of the way that resources are being used if it sits within one provider. And we hoped by doing that we could offer then better choice and support to families and children in the way that they can receive their support. We're also really keen by doing that to strengthen the early help offer that families initially will receive when they first access services, and also strengthen the kind of non-residential component of that. So I think we're really wanting to make the short break offer now across non-residential and residential better able to be more flexible and able to meet the changing needs of our children who receive short breaks. I think we're really keen that we stop families going into crisis. So I think we see this as a real key part of the proposals and changes within the model as we strengthen our early help and support. So in trying to kind of prevent fragmentation and enable children and families to only tell their story once, we want to be able to create a central hub that will really, if you like, be the administrative aspect of the short break changes, so that you've got one hub where children and families can receive their referral and their assessment as one, instead of having to go to different services to be assessed and then tell their story again. And we hope to then create a seamless offer that where families can find that much easier to navigate. So by having that one central hub, that will bring everything together. We also want to enable staff to work across the different services. so that we know we've got a lot of skilled staff working in our residential services. We want to enable that kind of skills and knowledge of really highly complex children to be shared across the whole of the workforce, and that thereby hopefully will give children with highly complex, particularly medical needs, a better access to non-residential short breaks. So I think we're really keen to kind of change that offer, particularly for those with the highest need, where currently it's usually residential and that's it. I think what we also want to do is grow the services that we're offering, and we want to introduce a fundraiser function, and that's a new concept for us. So we need to kind of, obviously that will be the additional funding that we need to kind of free up, if you like, but we need to be able to grow that offer through that function. And in terms of how then do we introduce our volunteer workforce, we're really keen to do that within particularly the non-residential offering, and so that we can bring in also specialist play workers, so that again that our more kind of skilled support staff can then be freed up to be targeted at our most complex children. And then just moving on to a community link function, and I think that's really about building on and creating community relationships so that we can ensure all of our families have knowledge of how to access services and offer that support to navigate that in that way. I think also we need to kind of think differently about our residential short break units and how we are offering support to families, and whether we can introduce daytime support to those families so that they don't just have to have an overnight, but we can use same skills of staff but bring in daytime support. And I have to say that really came out for families with younger children. They really wanted that kind of flexibility there. So I think by bringing together all of the services under one hopefully lead provider, by creating a kind of a workforce that can move across services, we want to be able to offer then better support and choice and be much more flexible to the needs of families. So I'm now going to hand over to Sam, who is from MPFG. Thank you. To talk about the next phase of the engagement.
Thank you. So the next phase of the engagement will be an open, accessible, robust and effective consultation with parents, carers, service providers, practitioners, young people, as many people as we can reach, to get their feedback on not just the proposed model, but actually are there any other creative solutions out there? Is NCT the right front door to be knocking on, as we hear there are barriers to accessing assessments and services? Do families really want another assessment? Is there another qualifying criteria? There's DLA assessments, for example. There's EHCP assessments. That might be another option. So effectively what we want to do is expand the consultation and make it meaningful, and go out there and get as many options brought back to the table and as many opinions from our families and our young people and our service users as possible. So we'll be doing that with a digital consultation that we will promote on social media and direct to our membership, and on our WhatsApp broadcast channel. We will go out to all our affiliated partners, voluntary sector partners, as well as strategic partners that we work with. And following that, we'll be doing face-to-face consultations that we're going to co-produce. We've already asked IAS to come on board with us, and some of the young people groups, they'll be joining us as well to offer their solutions and their perspectives during this consultation. So that's ideally where we're heading at the moment, and that's why we've been asked to come in and co-produce this effective, open and transparent consultation.
And sort of just to finish off, because this has been going on a little while, I think, and as Sam has just said, the most important thing is that we do this well and comprehensively. I think we all acknowledge that these are complex services with children and families with complex needs, and we won't please everybody, but we will do our absolute best to be able to provide as much as we possibly can with as much as we possibly can, but it's not without some of its challenges. So so there is a complexity around this, also with our current provider in terms of longevity, excuse me, which is why it's driven the timeline. But I think being honest about it, we want to achieve that timeline, but if we have to have a B plan that means that we do it properly, then we will of course consider that. But this has been a lot of work by everybody around me, and we're very grateful for Sam's involvement, because she keeps us all grounded so far, and I'm sure that will continue. But we do have to move at some pace with this, because I think this has been around for a little while, and the clock is ticking on our current provider. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's one of the things. Every young person's individual, have their own individual requirements. I'm sure. I've got a few questions. I'll ask one and then open it up. When I read the papers, apart from a brief thing in one of the focus groups, there's no mention at all of Northamptonshire carers, which surprised me, because I thought they would be at the very heart of this sort of thing, because the support they provide for families is well appreciated. You get a lot of good comments. Were they involved and you just not put them in the report? Or?
So we invited, previously there was an open survey for anybody to complete. I'm not aware if they personally completed it or not. We've been holding a number of provider events. I can go back and check and make sure that they have been invited to our provider events as well.
Yeah, substantial.
Apologies, I don't have that information with me.
Councillor McGee.
Thank you. I applaud your appetite for a well thought out and well listened consultation. That's not always there, or sometimes it is there and then nobody looks at it. So I appreciate your kind of appetite to really do that. It's really important. Can you expand a little bit more on the fundraising element of things that you were talking about, what that means and where that comes from, and how that kind of practically works? What kind of fundraising is it?
So essentially, we're aware that there is a lot of charitable funds out there available for children with disabilities, and we don't always have the capacity to be able to focus in applying for those. Leave to the providers that are delivering the services. So we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to include a role within the provision that could be really focused on that, and focused on what is it that parents and families are wanting to access. So, for example, being able to apply for a grant to go on holiday together as a family, things like that. But also applying for some of the national funding grants that are out there. So it was really just have a dedicated support that could be completing funding bids, working with families, finding out what it is that they need, and applying to draw in any additional funding that could be available to run additional activities for what the children would desire. We're not expecting, we haven't built into the financial modelling that they need to draw in enough funding to be able to deliver the overall service. It would be added additionality onto the model.
Thank you. That's actually what I do for a living, fundraising. So just from the perspective of who would apply for that fund? Because surely if you're applying under a statutory body, it creates a lot of different layers in accessing money. You don't have the same kind of opportunity to access money from trusts and foundations as you did if you were applying under a charity or a different body. So how does that work?
So, some of it depends on who the provider is. So if it's a charity that's running it, so for example, our non-residential short breaks at the moment are delivered by a charitable organisation, but also things like big lottery funding is available for local authorities and other statutory providers. So, and part of that role would be to be researching and finding out what is available out there.
Okay, so the fundraiser would be on a statutory payroll, but actually do the work potentially on behalf of partner organisations to kind of bring them in all under one roof.
The idea is that they would be researching what funding opportunities there are out there and applying for those funding opportunities.
Thank you.
Councillor Best.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming here and telling us about this tonight. It sounds like a good project, a good piece of work. A couple of questions, please. I think you said you're modelling after a similar process that had been adopted by West Sussex and Bromley. have you identified any fundamental differences between those areas, those authorities in Northamptonshire that might pose a risk? So if you look at adopting what they're doing, are there any differences which could be a risk? And the second part of the question is, once you've come up with the final design of what you're doing, the process, the offering, after consultation, and roll it out, how do you propose to monitor or measure it to know that it's been successful? So what does success look like to you in a year or 2 years' time?
So in terms of the other areas, we're aware that other areas, not everybody has a kind of medical-based model, not everybody has an NHS provider delivering services. Some areas have complete open access for any child with disability to be able to access and self-refer into. So there's a whole range of different ways of doing it. And we currently have a model with an NHS provider and voluntary sector provider, and that in itself brings benefits, but it also brings some challenges in terms of any changes and other providers potentially being interested in delivering that as well. So one of our risks is around interested parties to deliver this, which is why we're also, as well as engaging with parents and carers and professionals, practitioners, we're engaging with providers out there as well to get their input into the proposals and gauge interest from them as well. In terms of what's... Sorry, do you want to add?
Sorry, I was just going to add as well, I think one of the things we should be proud of in the current model is that it is a really integrated model where we have got children who, with really quite complex medical needs, are able to access our residential provision, which I think in other areas they haven't been able to quite do that. And I think, so therefore we want to build on that and enable them to not just access the top end, the residential. I think we've had other areas come to us to say, how are you managing to do that? And they really like the fact that we're a collaboration, if you like, of health and social care coming together to try and meet all the holistic needs of our children. So I think the risks are we don't want to lose that. We really want to maintain that, but we want to build on it as well. So I think that was something we've really kind of learnt just going out to other areas to see what they're doing in this way.
I think Mr. Watts wanted to add a comment as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of questions. So first one, I think, Sam, you might have answered it anyway. So one of the bits which I saw in the document was very much about access to short breaks would be through an early help assessment. But what I couldn't find in the report, albeit that I may have missed it, was, well, how do we perform on that as an area? Are there backlogs? Are there delays? And therefore, will that impact on access? But I think what you're saying is, well, we want to consult on that further to find out whether there are different ways of getting that access. So that's fine, but correct me if I'm wrong. The other bit, there was very little on financing, but the section about pooling of budgets, the 2.8 million currently spent on short breaks, and then looking at bringing together some of, was it ICT services to make a pooled budget of 4.7. So it sounds like it's the same pot of money just being brought together. So I suppose the challenge that I would say then is, so what will that do? Will that mean that the offer will get better or become more efficient? So it's not clear about what the bringing together of that will achieve. Will it deliver better quality, or will it become more efficient and support more people more quickly? And then the final bit is my DAS head on, my Director of Adult Services head. So you will know, and Sam, you will probably know from the groups that you support, that there's what would be described a cliff edge as when becoming an adult. So there has to be something around how do we work together as a system to, one, manage expectations around the change in support that you may get, and how we prepare and support young people and their families to manage that moving forward. I'm just interested in your comments around that as well.
I had a couple of the same ones. In particular, I was concerned about the comment where an EHA would need it. people find it difficult to refer and access, and that seemed like another barrier, having a gatekeeper there that, you know, wasn't necessarily, and I wondered, you know, if it was definitely going to be the case that you wouldn't have self-referral, because I can understand the need to make sure you get the right people, but you know, providing a barrier where you don't want one is a concern. I had a finance one as well, but if you want to do that.
So in terms of the assessment, so at the moment what we're suggesting is access either through a social care assessment, an early help assessment, or a continuing care assessment. That's so for all the children that have residential short breaks at the moment, they would all have a social care or a continuing care assessment, or both. In terms, we absolutely want to hear people's views, and this will be what we talk to parents and carers about. If it was open entirely to everybody with a EHCP, we'd have to consider what impact that would have on availability of sessions for children, because obviously there's an increasing number of children with EHCPs, and not every child with an EHCP has a disability, and the short breaks are aimed at children with disabilities. So it's something we want to look at. Obviously, social care and continuing care are statutory assessment. Early help assessments are done by different agencies, so health, schools, children's services, and we know that the majority of those happen in children's services, but we're working with partners for them to be undertaking more as well. So access is something that we want to look at, and we absolutely take the point. If people have already had an assessment, then it makes sense to use that. We need to discuss with providers as well, because in order to provide the service, providers need to have the right information to know how to look after the child appropriately. In terms of funding, so the total budget, when we pull together what is currently within the envelope for residential and non-residential services, it's 2.8 million, and that's contributions from ICB and NCT, obviously NCT being funded by West and North Northants. The future phase that we're thinking of, which takes us up to the 4 million, is our home care services. So both NCT and ICB commission personal care and support that goes into people's homes. So part of our thinking is that in the future we could bring that into the model as well, so that we're having that wraparound support where children can be supported in their home, in the community, and in a residential unit according to their needs. So that's it's the current funding that's available, and we're hoping that it will bring efficiencies by bringing things together, and as Sian described, that sort of central coordinating hub, using staff in different ways to how they're currently used at the moment, and sharing of skills. Do you want to add anything, anybody?
It was also, I think, by bringing in our home care services, we wanted to avoid some of the duplication that we currently have in the system in terms of double funding. And I think that's really to kind of, because we have children who are accessing already funded non-residential services, but are then also needing to be accompanied by maybe a home care provider because of the skill set within that non-residential activity. So I think we're trying to kind of, yes, make efficiencies and make sure we're spending the money wisely, and we're putting that support around the child in the best way possible, whether it be in the home and in other settings with one assessment that informs that care package wherever that child might go. But I think also in terms of the quality, we've got highly skilled trainers, that staff that are working in the home care setting. We want to be able to kind of again bring that workforce into a short break offer, so that we can share that skill set and have a workforce that can move with the child and know the child and wherever they may be. So I think it's an untapped resource at the moment. It's separate to what we're trying to offer. So it's the right thing to bring that offer in and make it a much more rounded and robust offer.
And in terms of transitions to adulthood, it's absolutely key point and something that parents have raised with us, and well, yeah, we're all aware, aren't we, of the change, the difference there is between children's services and adult services support for children with disabilities. So that's something that we want to build into the model, that they are better supporting children as they get towards 18. And Sam, have you got a view on that, Sam? From 16, yes. And we had a question about what does success look like as well, and I wondered if, Sam, have you got any thoughts on that?
I think success would be that future generations have a service that's fit for purpose, that they tell us that they're happy with, that's financially viable and meets as many needs as possible with a less cumbersome access route.
Mr. Watson wanted to come back in.
So, yeah, sorry, I missed one of my questions off. Believe it or not, I gave you lots of them. It was actually following up from Councillor McGee's question around accessing funding, and I think you suggested that there would be someone within the organisation. I guess the question would be, why we're not, have we considered one of our voluntary and charitable sector infrastructure organisations as potentially being the right place for that to be hosted, rather than within one of those services? So going a step further from Councillor McGee, who was incredibly kind to you through not suggesting that, but have we considered that? And if we haven't considered that, why not? And if we have, what was the rationale for perhaps having that resource within one of the statutory services?
We hadn't considered it, so we will do now. Thank you. That's a really good suggestion.
Okay. I mean, picking up the financing, I think we need a better medium-term financial plan laid out, because I was trying to work out how 2.6 million was an uplift from 2.8 million, and then it went down to 2 and suddenly up to 4.7, and it wasn't very, I mean, you've explained some of it, but it wasn't very clear how that was all going on.
If I could just clarify, sorry about that. So the residential short breaks, currently the budget is 2 million per year, which is shared between ourselves and the ICB. However, it's currently costing 2.6. So we've added additional budget into the residential short breaks aspect of it. However, the overall envelope that we have available, non-residential and residential, is 2.8. In order for us to put that extra into residential, we've had to not run a grants programme. From NCT's perspective, we had a amount of funding available for a grants programme for children with disabilities. We've not run that so that we can put it into residential short breaks. ICB have secured the funding to contribute their part. So that's when I talk about the financial sustainability challenge that we have with the residential short breaks. That's where that comes from. So the idea is also about bringing things together so that in that 2.8 overall envelope, we should hopefully get some better efficiencies.
Councillor Maxwell.
Well, I thought I read that next year you actually lose some funding. Is that correct? For a period?
The residential short breaks budget would need to return back to 2 million.
And what happens if it doesn't?
We'd have to continue in the way that we are at the moment by utilising money that would be in the non-residential envelope. So at the moment, the budget is in these different silos for residential and non-residential. The remodelling plans to bring it together. If we don't make the changes, then the residential short breaks will continue costing what they cost, and we'll need to continue with a non-residential element, which is less than what we would want it to be.
Councillor Brown.
Oh, can I just ask one more question?
There's a surprise.
Ah. Do you not think the government should actually be funding more of this?
I don't think we don't.
Are we allowed to answer that?
You don't have to get drawn into that. Because
Sam can answer that, but as officers, we're probably not allowed to.
I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't like more money for everything. Councillor
Brown. Just to go back to the waiting list, I know it was a question I wanted to ask before Mr. Watson. He put it a lot more eloquently than me, but I've still got an itch that needs scratching, I think. Just so I'm clear, so there was previously a waiting list. There's been an assessment introduced, and now there's no waiting list. To me, that suggests potentially that maybe the service was being abused previously. If that's not the case, how can we marry those two up? Because I can't quite get it straight in my head how you could have a waiting list before you've got an assessment and now there's no waiting list. To me, it says that you've created a barrier in essence, and people who should be using this service are now no longer using the service. So yeah, I'd like your thoughts on that.
It's a panel, it's a multi-agency panel that we've put in place. So when families require support, they've already gone through an assessment, social care assessment or a continuing care assessment. We now have a multi-agency panel in place that looks at what's the best package of support to support the family. Also, within this time, we've increased the home care support that is available. So some families prefer to have that rather than residential short breaks. So I don't think we've necessarily created a barrier. I think it's just that we're working together better to have families access support that they need. Non-residential short breaks, though, there is still a waiting list on that side of things.
Okay, a couple of others then. So I think you said ACH are running the residential sites. Are they inspected by Ofsted or CQC? Ofsted, both individually or as part of an overall package? So you get a report on each individual one. Okay. There were no bidders for one of the contracts. Any particular reason that you can tell us?
There is some hesitancy from non-NHS providers to take on any NHS terms and conditions. We're aware that is a challenge. And yeah, just in terms of providers that are able to provide the level and quality of support that we need. There's a relatively small number out there.
Okay. And the last one for me, talk about a joined-up service, bringing things together, and I just saw the situation of the IT systems from NCT, NNC, ICB, and anybody else involved not talking to each other because they don't seem to do that. And I just wondered if you'd looked at that, because that could be a very expensive item if you don't know what's coming down the road on that.
Yeah, so again, that would be for the provider to look at with any partners that they are working with. It is possible, so for example, Action for Children, who we commission to deliver services for us, we are able to provide them, obviously with all the appropriate safeguards and everything, with access to our system so that they're able to input information onto families that they're working with who are known to social care with the appropriate safeguards and data protection, etc. So there are ways and means of doing that, but we would, at this stage, we don't know who the provider is going to be, so that is something that we would need to work out. They would need to be working out, but it's definitely something we can highlight within the service specification as a requirement.
Yeah, just the two trying to disaggregate here is difficult enough and expensive enough without the complication of NHS IT as well, and I live that as well at the hospital. Anybody else got any questions? Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
The parents who would like to have a break, for a night, for instance, which is what we're aiming to do, do you actually have a place whereby these children then go for the night and then their parents have a break? Yeah. And what age group are you talking about in this type of provision?
So it's 0 to 18s, but those that use the residential side of things tend to be the older children. In terms of the units, there's one in West and one in North, but they're accessed by children from across the county, and they're the ones that are delivered by NHFT.
And of course, I think the issue is that parents do need to have a break. They need to seriously have a break because the nature of bringing up a child who has a disability is quite challenging actually for them. If you're looking for funding outside the NHS or the way it's coming in at the moment, what avenues do you think that people would help to give this funding? What avenues?
So the type of funding that's out there, Councillor McGee could probably answer this better than me. The type of funding that's out there is more around sort of activities or holidays or sessions for children and people, not so much on the residential side of things.
I think also it's about giving choice and control to families and how they do receive their short breaks. So I think we're really keen to kind of explore that more with personal budgets, certainly from personal health budgets and certainly direct payments. We can now start to look at how do we enable families to perhaps choose their own short break, and perhaps they may want to take a night away with their child being cared for in their home. So it's about that choice to control that we can provide for families in that way. So it's not just ourselves saying this is how you will receive it. It's about finding out from families how they would like to access that.
I mean, there are a number of charities that have things like they own caravans near the coast and they let people use them. So working with those sort of people would maybe be an opportunity. Councillor Maxwell.
Well, I was just going to say, just how many parents with the children who have disabilities like this do we have in this part of Northampton Council? Do you think?
So overall across the whole county, we've got about 70 to 80 children using the residential short breaks and about 120 children using the non-residential short breaks. It's probably split just a bit less than 50-50, a bit less than 50% in Northants.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendations, apart from noting what we've been provided with, we're asked to provide any views on the proposals. Anybody, apart from the comments we've made already, want to add any views or anything? No? Oh, Councillor, that's what? Nearly promoted
Not Councillor.
Nearly promoted you then.
I suppose that the one bit which we've obviously got this consultation period at the moment. I just wonder whether councillors have got any, perhaps we've already mentioned the, Councillor Lorman, you mentioned carers Northamptonshire as being one area where perhaps you would expect to see maybe some targeted consultation in that sense. But are there other resources which councillors are aware of that they might suggest to colleagues over that side of the table around who they could be speaking to? So I know Councillor McGee, you would probably say Kingswood Centre because of some of the contact which we have there. But
doctor's surgeries, have you gone through doctor's surgeries?
We very much want to include GP practices as well, because you know, families will be accessing those services. So I think we've got to make sure that you know, with the carers forum and also the other community forums that are a natural kind of draw for families, because if we think about health visitors, they see a lot of our children early on, so we need to ensure that those targeted kind of groups of people are understanding what we're trying to do and how they can help us engage as well with families and be able to access them in their own homes. So I think it's a real kind of, you know, if we need to do this better, then we certainly will. So I think any intelligence will be helpful.
I don't know, any of them at school, or are they at special schools like Friars or Rowan Gate? I mean, obviously that's a route for you.
Can I add something, Chair? Only to say, David just set me off, you see. Is there a focus, should there be a focus on areas in the county that have particularly high levels of deprivation? Because, I mean, it's all very well having all these challenges, but if you have quite a lot of financial resource, I can imagine that makes it slightly easier than being in an area with really high levels of deprivation and not having that expendable income to kind of invest in these really lovely things. So only, as always, to kind of push for that, but also just to kind of say that you've taken quite a grilling this evening for something that's actually really brilliant. So I do appreciate that, and, you know, my thanks go to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. It's late, I know. But, have you got?
You've got here after school clubs and Saturday clubs. Had you thought about the scouts? You know, maybe one evening, you know, where they actually meet, maybe they want somebody going along to a scout meeting and enjoy that side of things so they feel normal, not left out. It's just an idea.
Okay, thank you. So yes, thanks very much for coming. I hope you found it useful. Obviously, if councillors have got items that they want to feed, and you've got until, is it October the 23rd to feed stuff in?
Yes, so the public survey will be going out by the end of the month. We're currently working with MPFG on finalising that. So yes, that will be, and it will be hosted on the NNC Consultation Hub Citizen Space.
Yeah.
So yes, please encourage people to complete that.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, that concludes a bit. We haven't got this on the agenda, but I thought we ought to talk about the future work plan briefly. So our next meeting is 14th of November, and it could be quite a busy one because we've got obviously this depends on people being available, potentially got the ICB 5-year joint forward plan, so Eileen's just left, but check it. The EMAS annual report is out, and so is the KGH annual report. And there's people have asked for an item on dentistry availability and performance. So those are the four. Whether we have time for all four and whether the people involved will be available, officers are sorting out. And there's also an executive report coming up, a cultural heritage and tourism business plan, which is probably going to most of the scrutiny committees. And then in January, we've suggested an update on the Kettering Hospital rebuild and progress from the local area partnership and community wellbeing forums. And so the rest there are others in the long list, if you like, but they haven't been detailed in. So, for instance, we want to talk about GP availability and drug treatment. Yeah. So, but we are looking for additional things. So, if people have got things they want to have on the list, then put them in, and we'll see if we can do them. There's nothing stopping individual councillors going out and talking to officers or talking to other organisations if they've got a particular thing they want to find, as long as they bring the report back. We haven't got any working parties set up, and there's a bit of a limit, but if there are things we want to set up working parties, then there's a process for doing so. I think that's fair. Yeah.
Just, I don't understand why culture, heritage and tourism business plan comes to this committee.
No, it won't just, I think it'll go to 2 or 3 different scrutiny
Does it
committees.
need to come to us? Because we only meet once every 2 months,
I
and
think
we've
it's
got
to do
such an important
It's to do with the
workload.
health and well-being element of it. You know, things like walking and so on.
So it's leisure. It's leisure as well.
Yes,
then
yes.
That's not mentioned here. Okay. And one more point, if I may, can we please build up a glossary of acronyms, of abbreviations, because tonight quite so many have been mentioned. So it'd be good to keep it open to people. I mean, IAS was mentioned. Do you know what that is? I was going to challenge you and ask, do you know what it is?
Advisory service, but anyway, yeah. It's an advisory service, I believe. So.
What advisory service? Right.
I can't remember the I is.
Thank you. Could we please have that somewhere for people who are new to this committee, and it is a new committee?
Yeah. Because of the change, I didn't see the papers before they went out. Normally, when I read the papers, that's the sort of thing I go through and look for, but I haven't seen them this time. So
that one, actually, to be fair on you, wasn't in the papers, I think. But there are quite a few abbreviations in here, and it'd be good to have a glossary that we can supplement. Thank you.
Well, the NHS loves them. So.
We have to be inclusive. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. If we're all done.
Just quickly on that, what's ICB? ICB?
Integrated Care Board.
Oh, that's Integrated Care Board.
Not,
Thanks.
not,
Sorry?
there's about 5 integrated care things. Okay, thank you. I'll close the meeting, and thank you very much for attending. Safe journey home.